Hi, and welcome to this very special world premiere live web stream of an extraordinary piece by the composer Ted Hearne and the poet Saul Williams. The work is called Place. It's a study of art during the age of gentrification, and it takes on themes of both gentrification and displacement. Ted Hearne is no stranger to taking on big ideas in his pieces. The botched recovery of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina led to his Katrina Ballads. Further pieces have taken on oral arguments at the Supreme Court and the WikiLeaks scandal. So Place is something that has been intended for live performance. In fact, the LA Philharmonic, which commissioned the piece, was supposed to have done it in March. And it was, of course, a victim of cancellation, as virtually everything else in the art world was this spring. So we, here in a virtual rendition or a virtual version of the Green Space, are proud to bring you a world premiere stream of what they're calling, and I think this is appropriate, an at-home version of Place. It's got a diverse cast, and as you will see early on in this piece, for at least one of the members of the cast, the idea of gentrification and displacement is more than an idea. It's not a metaphor. It becomes a part of her life. And that is just one of the many remarkable threads running through this piece. So please enjoy our world premiere and stay with us, because afterwards we'll have all of the principals here to tell us what it's all about and to unpack the way the piece was made and then remade. Here is the at-home version of Place by Ted Hearne and Saul Williams.
Last question, I think. How would you define home? How would you define, like, from an alien planet were to ask you what characterizes home?
Like what? The place where.
The place where I let my guard down.
The place where I don't think about. The place where I don't think about. The place where I don't think about myself at all, and the place where I don't present. I'm someone who loves attention and love to perform. Singing. Because
every time you think you're talking, you're just moving your mouth.
You're just talking. Singing.
I sing because I'm happy.
I'm also someone who can completely crash and burn when I just think about what I'm putting out there, and place my guard down, where I don't. 20. The place I don't perform. I'm present. Place to love to talk to crash to put it out there. Home.
Like a map with no ocean. Every
Every time you think you're walking, you're just moving the ground. He walks and halts to his speech. He walks and halts to his speech. The song is long and like a sketch. The storm is like a sketch. A comic stabilizing. This year I turned 36. Every time you think you're talking, you're just moving your mouth. This year I turned 36. Every time you think you're talking, you're just moving your mouth. He skips as he sings. He skips as he sings. They don't love you like I love you. Maps. They don't love you like I love you. Maps. They don't love you like I love you. A vast amount of vast amount of energy that goes into what we call the to what we call the Negro problem. Manual was the truth. That I encroached by the white man's profound desire. Refuse to give you liberty to guard and keep me judged once on by those who are not white, not to be seen as these. A vast amount of the white anguish. White and terrible. It's most terrible. Rooted in the white man. And I'm inclined to embrace your profound need to be seen as he. To be seen as he is. To be really of bitterness, of ferocious resentment. Tyranny of his mirror. Some have suggested it is not a feeling, but a way of blocking feeling. A pride, a good, an impotence. Others have suggested it is a displacement from a deeper unfairness. A pride, a God, and a essential heart. One can feel in response to the destructive is available. Is available.
Is it okay to say, oh? Is it okay to say, oh? Is it okay to say white supremacy in white spaces? Can we get to the bottom of this? Is it okay to say bottom? Is it okay to say, is it okay to say, is it okay to say, is it okay to say? Is it okay to say you are kind not welcome here? Is it okay to say welcome? Is it okay to say? Is it okay to say? Am I okay? 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 Is it okay to say I did not make these rules? Is it okay to say sorry and do it anyway? Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay to let some anger show? Is it okay? Is it okay? Is it okay? What about my son? 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 What about son? What about my 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 son?
What about my son? What about my son? What about my son? What about my son? What about my son? What about my son? What about my son?
This may come as some surprise, but I miss you. What about my son? 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 My son, my son. What about my son? What about my son?
I'd rather not talk about it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about history.
I bet you don't.
You don't want to talk. 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 You don't. Too convenient. Too easy. It's too hard. It's
Too heavy,
it's
too dark.
too tiring, too useless to think about. You who have no place, no place, no place for memories unless they are your own. You are welcome here. Consider it home.
Displacement loop. There's no place like home. There's no place. There's no home.
This land was worth every war. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful,
but my beauty is all the rage. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am the highest hill, I am a funeral, I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am the highest hill, I am a funeral, and this land was worth every war. My beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. My anger is beautiful, but my beauty is all the rage. I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am the highest hill, I am a funeral, I am rich as soil, I am a lakeside view, I am the highest hill, I am a funeral, and this land was worth every war. This land was worth every war. Hey. And the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was mine, and the land is mine, and the land was.
The tales you tell your children. This place is going cheap. This place is renting me. This place no coffee shop. This place got sugar crop. This place where father grew. This place was different time. This place will bury you. This place is in your mind. A glass bedroom over a shattered favela. It was an explosion, first in heart, now at hand.
was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was mined, and the land is mine, and the land was.
New faces. I look around the world, I see a lot of new faces. I look right down my street, I see a lot of new faces.
And there's a mall with churches where the stores would be.
And we got pop-up shops that give out water for free. I look around, I see a lot of new faces. They give out God for free, but they sell in places. I look around the world,
business. Mind your business. Mind your business. Mind your business. Mind your business.
And the land was
migration, just
Mass, they don't love you like I love you.
white flight, white flight, white flight. White flight, white flight, white flight. White flight.
They don't love you like I love you.
White flight, white flight, white flight, white flight.
They don't love you like I love you.
Migration.
Bouncing off your shore. Sometimes it's hard to see.
Migration.
I see a concession without the sea. I sing because I'm happy.
White flight, white flight, white flight.
I sing because
I'm migration.
is this the promised land?
Migration.
Or just another cool neighborhood? Am I inventing shit?
Migration.
Or just walking with my eyes closed?
Migration.
Is there a place that you are not invaded?
Is it that God is male, that laws are just excuses?
Systemic prejudice, the law cannot contain me. Systemic prejudice, I'm spinning on my own. Systemic prejudice, it ain't my fault, don't blame me. Systemic prejudice, I'm building a new home.
You were never comfortable with intimacy. You're in the business of you. You approached it abruptly. None of your reasons are true. Each planted flag a dagger through Caesar's mantle. Et tu, et tu, et tu. You're in the
a million miles to see this, but I only have this one. A million bright ambassadors, a morning mother's son, as if each cloud were testament of trials yet to come, and yet the sky was clearer than its memory. Earth as my hard drive, sky as my witness. Search engine, find Indian.
I need a million miles. 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 To say that all around this world, a million right hours, a million more stars. Each cloud a testament of trials after all the skies was clear in its memory.
Control shift population.
Press buttons, take lives.
Press keys, pull triggers.
Shake hands, gain confidence.
Poison by touch. Quarantine those you infect.
Fire cannon, introduce modern warfare. See drone finds come to alive and expands.
Puts his money where my mouth is, holds my nose, the quivering hand.
The body slides across the floor and opens its mouth.
Oh, oh, la 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 la, quiero ir mi gente. I need a million miles. I need a million miles. I need a million miles. I need a million miles, I need a million miles. I need a million miles, I need a million miles. I need a million miles to say this, but I only have this one. A million bright ambassadors, the morning mother's sun, as if each cloud were testament of trials yet to come. Yet the sky was clearer than its memory.
I need a million miles. 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 To say this, but I only have this one. A million right ambassadors, morning by the sun, as if each cloud were a testament of trials yet to come, and yet the sky was clear in its memory.
And yet the sky was clearer than its memory.
Everybody know when the sunrise. See it dawn in the all night. Dying bloom in a season. Everybody know what the folks call reasoning. On a distant planet where the reason landed and the folks transparent. Fourth dimensional libation granted. Projectile vomit of the stars. A question of resources, hands to clean it up. Subprime mortgages. This place is something else. Do you want to share your location? Do you want to share your location? More than one to choose from. A future histories, a chance survival, a hidden mystery. Binary rivals. The gravitational pull, the radiation, the use of fear to rule, but not the Haitians, the foreseen colonies, but not the past ones. A message from the last ones. They will call it an improvement and price you out. Here is what we've learned. Here is what we've learned. The subject responds to paranoia in violent turns. The outcome is cyclical. Subject place. Subject place. Subject place. If the subject is space, we'll speak of colonizing once again. There are no victims. We need to talk. We need to talk. Everybody know when the sunrise. See it dawn in the all night. Dying bloom in a season. Everybody know what the folks call reasoning. On a distant planet where the reason landed and the folks transparent. Fourth dimensional libation granted.
Everything was something. Some time ago. Nothing was everything.
I need space.
Those bright things that are glowing. Boom. 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 You are my only son. You are my everything. And if you fuck it up, I'll give you more.
I need space.
Do not kneel for the rockets. Do not kneel for the anathema. Recognize no boundaries. That is our law, our place among. Place your hands against the wall. Place your hands where I can see them. Place your hands amongst the stars.
There you have the world premiere of this at-home version of Place, a multimedia work by composer Ted Hearne and poet Saul Williams, both of whom are joining me, along with director Patricia McGregor and the vocalist, flutist, and composer Natalie Joachim. It's great to have you all here. Thank you so much for sharing this piece with us, which, of course, originally was supposed to have been premiered on the West Coast by the LA Philharmonic. Ted, you and Patricia and Saul worked for a number of years to bring this project to fruition. How different is what we just saw from what the audience at the Brooklyn Academy of Music saw when the original version was premiered?
Great question. And thank you so much for hosting this, John, and for all that you do. And I'm so glad to see that you're still rocking it and you're still on the air.
Yep.
And it's like, this is really, really great and an honor to be here. And, you know, the piece is continually evolving with the times, I think. So, you know, there are a lot of tendrils from the production that we did at BAM in 2018 that are here. And Patricia's directorial vision was just completely inspirational in making this. But of course, like, obviously, you know, there are totally different stories and totally different images in this version because everyone was trapped in their spaces, you know.
And so, Saul, I noticed the line, quarantine those you infect. Was that a late addition to the text, or was that sort of preternaturally, you know, present in this piece 2-3 years ago?
It was preternaturally present in this piece 2 to 3 years ago.
Really?
Oh, of course, yeah. It was, well, we were talking about gentrification, we were talking about migration, and I just didn't feel comfortable writing about that in American cities without recognizing First Nations and the places where they've been put in society, and just giving honor to where we stand in all places in this country starts there. And so then the idea of quarantining those who infect, the germ traveled faster than the bullet, the whole idea of the virus that was spread, by colonizers and what have you, was present in my mind as I was writing. So.
Wow. Well, as so often happens with a work of art, the times around it change and the work, accrues new levels of meaning and resonance. So I guess I'm not totally surprised to hear that answer. But Patricia, Ted was saying how, the piece has morphed and has evolved over the time that you've all been working on it. How different a look or how different a storyline do we have now in this version that we've just seen produced in quarantine?
Well, it's wildly different in that it's so intimately created in people's individual spaces. And in many ways, the stage production that we did started with what we called the cacophony desk. So it was really looking at Ted and the idea of like, I have all these things I want to say, but how do I say something right? And that person was really trapped. In many ways, the way everyone now in these pieces is kind of, they're in their own self-quarantine. And then the decision to step outside, to step into the world and to step outside of a comfort zone, to go into the world and try and engage with other people, other narratives, was really physicalized in a very different way. And so, and Ted really took the helm on this one. We talked about it before, and we talked about what could translate from the stage. And then Ted really took the helm with working with the singers on filming in their own spaces and then doing the editing. And then we talked back and forth. But I think that part, our piece in many ways was like the cacophony desk and then going outside. And when Saul's pieces came in, that was a way to break out of just this internal monologue and this idea of like white privilege. And I don't want to talk about it, so I'm just not going to say anything. And then we intentionally bust out into a very open space, but we can't do that now. The other thing I'll say is, and I don't know if Ted is okay to say this, but I'm just going to say it, that there are two pieces. Up until last Friday, there were two pieces that introduced this whole journey that we'd always talked about back and forth, like how, the first parts felt a little long, what's necessary. And then really Ted had an impulse, and I was like, that was my, one of three notes was, let's actually start with the piece Interview, which was the one that we started with today, because in a full stage production, there were other markers that could help the audience kind of experience something and follow the journey. And we thought, let's actually start with Interview, which was a really pure start of the piece, and hopefully would allow the audience into a place where they understand where it was coming from for Ted, and hopefully, give enough markers that they could follow the digital journey in a clearer way.
Right, and that piece Interview, I mean, that is really where the libretto started, where the idea for the piece was. That's when I first had a conversation with you, and the LA Phil brought us together, and they filmed the conversation. And when I look back at that transcript, I was like, I know I'm trying to delve into something. I know I'm trying to write about gentrification or displacement, but I cannot say anything. And I'm looking back at this transcript, and it's just pages and pages of like, and it's like, what is so embarrassing? But it was like, that was the place to start, and yeah, it makes the whole thing a lot tighter actually as a video project. Plus we only need 20 minutes of a white man ruminating, I mean, before I was 30, so it's a little bit much.
Well, Ted, you and I did an interview on New Sounds on the radio before the BAM performance in 2018. And you talked about the kind of the specific moment of gentrification that you experienced living in Fort Greene in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that is, absolutely unrecognizable to me from what it was 30 years ago. And that, as so often happens, that kind of specificity writ large becomes something really universal. And then, as Patricia was saying, you had to shrink it down to the really individual and really personal for this version of the piece. And it seems to have gained a kind of power in that, in that downsizing to this intimate level. I don't know if you and Saul feel the same way about, your respective contributions to it, but a lot of the comments coming in are, people saying that it's really heartrending and moving and emotional.
Well, the singers themselves, I mean, they live in very different places, and they come from different places, and you see that in the video. I mean, of course, like to speak about displacement or to speak about disparity when you're in a theatrical setting, I mean, we have to imagine, right? And like I'm seeing one space and then I'm seeing another space, and of course, like just the surprise of the pandemic and the going from like having a healthy, robust career of gigs that all these singers have to nothing, like that affected everybody very differently. And some of them were really, really struggling to get by, like right in the moment, like right when this show was canceled. And you can see that in the video.
We see the eviction notice for Saul Ruiz that it's hung on her door. And
that was just like, she's in the middle of recording. You can see she records the first part in her space, and then she's like, Ted, I'm getting evicted and I don't have any money. And it's like, she had to move into a trailer. I mean, she had to make a change.
And so suddenly you're not dealing in metaphor, you're dealing in someone's real life kind of unfolding as the piece progresses. Mm-hmm. It's not an unheard of story, Natalie, among musicians. You have a presence in New York, but also in Chicago. What has your experience been?
I mean, I feel luckier than most, but I definitely feel that we're at a point of reckoning as a country, definitely as a music community, in that, this really is showing us who we've already been, what we already have, what has already been beneath the surface, how this sort of hustle culture of, every man for himself doesn't work. It doesn't function because we are all interconnected and we do all occupy spaces together. And we have to recognize and come to a place of understanding the history so that we can move forward. And so it's been interesting to see, I've had my own personal struggles, but for the most part, I'm healthy. I'm, surviving. But it has been interesting to see how suddenly, some people who may have never been impacted by really anything quite so grave in their lives are dealing with and facing the very systems that they were once thriving in. Yeah. And, I think for our industry, it definitely is, having just as profound an effect as it is on us, not just nationally, but globally. Quite frankly, it was bound to happen.
So, Saul, Ted, talk me through how the text came together. I mean, Saul, you're the poet, but you're also a musician. But I understand that Ted already had some texts when the two of you started working. How did you get into that? And there seems to be a kind of magpie sense of thievery. I thought I heard you pulling from different, was there a quote from "His eye is on the sparrow" at one point? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So, just give us a sense of how, and I'll use this term advisedly here, how the text was composed, because it does seem to be a kind of contrapuntal effort.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Why don't you start?
Okay, well, I was waiting for Ted to deliver what would be called the first part of plays. I had been commissioned essentially to write parts 2 and 3, and so which would be a response to what Ted, put on the page for the first part. And so, as you spoke about earlier, he spoke about that direct relationship he has with Fort Greene. Of course, I too have a relationship with Fort Greene that I think precedes Ted's. And then the text that Ted had written finally came. And as a writer, I was forced to divorce myself from the person that I know Ted is, whom I love and who I think is a great guy, and just think about the theme and subject that we were talking about. And I read this, this voice talking about his son and blah, 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 blah. And frankly, I didn't give a fuck. I had this, the first thing that came to mind was that the first piece I wrote for this was the direct response to what he had written, which was personal and blah, 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 blah. And I just imagined this, these Black voices saying, what about my son? What about my son? What about my son? And in fact, I thought that was enough. So I wrote it down like 50 times and that was the first piece for it.
Well, I mean, as a songwriter yourself, you know the worth, the use of repetition.
Power of repetition.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And from there, it was, just sort of like the slow motion refutation of the whole idea of just like, wait, what are we talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like, as I mentioned earlier, like what land are we on? Who were the first people that were moved out of their land? Like, and then when we talk about, so a lot of ideas came to mind, stretching from, the stories that my dad would tell me about growing up in Brooklyn in the 40s when there were cows and pigs and goats in the street. In Brownsville and what have you, and my memory of going back to his house where he grew up as a young kid in the 80s and 90s, and there were no cows and there were no goats, and him saying that it was totally unrecognizable from his childhood. And so I also was trying to balance this sensibility of well, it's also just natural that things change with time, that cities change with time. There's also that end of it. But then there's always these voices, white flight, thinking about, like my grandfather, for example, my mom and dad are both born and raised in Brooklyn, right? So my grandfather lived in Williamsburg for the past like 60 years. And I saw that. I saw that transformation in the 90s as well. And so I was just thinking a great deal about all of these realities. And as I was saying, kind of pulling myself back from my personal relationship with Ted and maintaining that critical eye that forces one to acknowledge that we are a part of a bigger picture, and that there is something even greater connected to, it helps the artist, it helps us to think about our individual and individualized experience. But on a global scale, gentrification is real as well. And so, And so for me, it started with that sort of like slight critical eye or critical gaze on Ted's text. And then I just kind of let it take me where it led me, knowing and really looking forward to what Ted was then going to do with the music.
Well, and at this point, Ted, it's worth talking about some of the things that you do with the music. Your use of auto-tune as a kind of structural element, as, a part of your compositional palette. But then there's also the striking moment where you do a kind of low-tech version of altering the voice where the singers sing behind their hands. So,
right. Well, that was in Saul's text. He wrote this incredible poem.
I wrote a poem to a covered mouth.
Yeah, the title of the poem, "Running to a Saul," written for Hands Over Mouths. I had the choice.
Yeah, but you took that literally.
Do that or not? But of course, it's in the text. And I'm like,
meant to be.
Yeah. And I thought that the idea of like, maybe we could have the text projected or maybe not, but you can't really hear what you're saying really. And then of course you can make this, this sort of like fun ooh-ah, wah sound, So yeah, that's certainly part of it. And the auto-tune, I started using auto-tune with Philip White, my collaborator. We developed together this this interactive use of autotune when we were performing with Are We Who Are We, which is our band. And, Philip is just a genius with electronic music. And he programmed this patch that that is just so fluid and, it has this great autotune sound. So I've used that in a couple of other pieces, but it sort of came to symbolize in a way for me, this sort of some sense of self-reflection, and there's this uncanny valley involved of that's definitely a human triggering it, but it definitely does not sound like a human. So I used it as a way for Stephen Bradshaw, the singer in the first part, to express himself or try to express himself. Maybe it would symbolize some sort of self-consciousness or, and in that first part, try to just use that autotune to help create this sort of circling sense of narcissism, of the self-consideration that goes on and on and on, and eventually, has to be slapped away. And that's, receiving Saul's text for part 2 was one of the greatest moments of my life, because that, it was this conversation that I wanted to have. And there's so much clarity, there's so much clarity in what you wrote. And it was such an amazing feeling. It was such an amazing challenge to process this text in a way that would respect it enough to be able to write music to it, and that's, and I'm so glad that we decided on that. That's what the form of the piece was going to be. I mean, we all decided that together. It's not like Saul was brought on later. This
Right.
piece was really conceived from the ground up with Saul and Patricia.
So Patricia, Ted mentioned, the idea of, do you show the text? Now, you have a composer, you have a poet, you have music, you have a text. There are moments where the text is being sung literally by mouths covered in hands or vocals that have been processed. And so that question of what to do, how much to show your hand, so to speak, must have come up pretty early, and I'm assuming came up yet again in a different way with the version that we just saw.
Yeah, one of my favorite, with a piece like this, one of my favorite things to think of is Lee Brewer talks about directing as mixing the tracks. And so how much abstraction and how much information do you give? How many breadcrumbs do you leave for an audience, and how much space do you leave for them to be able to put the breadcrumbs together themselves? And so what we decided on in this stage production, we always had the title of the song. So even if people were in a intentionally, sometimes it's intentionally Brechtian. Sometimes we're intentionally saying don't get lulled into the beauty of this or the dynamics of this, really pay attention. And so they could be caught in whatever emotional state they were in, but then look at that title and say, okay, what does that mean to have a meditation that is interview, or whatever the title was? So I feel like in this version, in the Stay Home, we actually used, I would say, more text, I think, than in the stage version, because sometimes there were things happening physically in the stage version that could help give you some anchors. But that's what, we tried to mix the tracks of what do we see, what do we hear, what do we feel, and how is it a distillation of? Because before we even started writing, or before the guys handed in their 2 parts of the libretto, we spent 6 months to a year just sending articles and all kinds of things to each other until we said, okay, let's distill that into these more personal experiences and responses. So I would just say the text, we try to have anchors, or sometimes the text is its own instrument trying to push above the cacophony to give you something to really flash like headlights and say, pay attention to this. Okay, now let this recede. Okay, pay attention to this. Now let this recede.
Yeah. Natalie, your wonderful recent record, Femmes d'Haïti, Women of Haiti, is, it gets into the world of documenting real people, real voices. In this case, your grandmother, was it? And other women from your family hometown in Haiti, and setting that to music. Did you feel a kind of a kindred spirit at work here when you first experienced Place?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say that to me, one of the most amazing and powerful things about this piece is that, what resonated with me in working on Femmes d'Haïti is that it's very hard to look away from an individual story. And when you're looking at things as a collective, it's very easy to say, like, that's not about me, or that doesn't have anything to do with me. But the second that you have connected a story or a narrative to an individual, it becomes really challenging for just about anyone to look away. And what feels wonderful to me about this work, what speaks to my own sort of like centering in my creative practice right now, is that it doesn't allow you to look away from what's important and what's valuable and how these stories sit next to one another, and how these narratives and these discussions need to come to the forefront. The power of hearing that first moment when you hear all of a sudden this string of people asking, "What about my son?" Makes you it hits you in a different way when you see it coming directly from, in this case, we're talking about characters, but again, also that the shift that happens from having seen the premiere at BAM to now seeing these individuals in their individual spaces, contemplating the same things in the moment that we're living in. There's something very powerful to me about that doesn't happen palpably enough in enough of the work that we see coming through in contemporary classical music specifically, but is very important. It changes the conversation, the conversations around the economy, around race, around social programs and who gets what and who lives where. Is always centered around, well, what about, what did those people do to, deserve that? It's never a conversation about what did we do to, and how about our own attachment to the system, you know what I mean? To the systems that created the ghettos, to the systems that created redlining. What is it about our attachment to the upholding of the systems that allows them to perpetuate? And this particular piece in this moment is exceptionally powerful to me, I think, because that's what the heart of it gets at. As somebody who wasn't part of the creative process, but has been deeply sort of steeping myself in the work in this moment, it does shift it. It's like, what is it about us that forgets that this conversation actually needs to be more about how it is that these conversations are not, in fact, centered around humanity, but are, in fact, centered around a deep attachment to defend and uphold systems that work against humanity, that work against people. And I like that. I really think that there is strength in narrative and attaching work and challenging questions to music and in this kind of a space that allows people to process it differently, but also forces you to hear it through the cacophony, also forces it to continue to come to your forefront, and recognize that, so much of the pushback is a pushback that is an instinct that we all have to try to defend a system that is like constantly attacking humanity.
That's really well said. There is a corollary question that raises, though, and I want to direct it to all of you, but mostly, I guess, to Saul and to Ted, because you did some of the text as well, which is it the function of art in a case like this to tell people what to think? I'm phrasing this in a really leading way, or is it enough to simply get a conversation, to ask the right questions and to get the conversation that Natalie was just talking about going? How do you walk that line? Saul?
Well, for me, it was really a matter of raising questions. And I wouldn't go so far as to say the right questions, but I had a lot of questions. And I tried to put all of those questions into the text. As I mentioned, the questions of the indigenous, the questions of all of these Black mothers and their sons, the questions surrounding history and systemic, realities that we face and that are denied. There were tons of questions. And for me, in relation to the bigger picture and the idea of art itself, I know an individual challenge that I've given myself. I wouldn't be so bold to speak about art in general, but I know a challenge that I've given myself is to raise questions in my work, you know? So no, I'm not trying to put ideas in people's minds or to supply answers. I'm truly trying to raise questions, but I'm trying to make sure that those questions do not ignore the things that we would rather not talk about, or the things that make us uncomfortable, or the things where we have so much oversight and so much self-concern that we always forget to think about that or forget to ask about that. So yeah, I would say that this definitely in this work, my work was very much about raising questions. On one hand, in response to some of the stuff that Ted had written, but then also in relation to the larger question, you know, and the larger question speaks to today, you know, speaks to the times right now, whether it's a mother talking about what about my son, or whether, you know, we're talking about the sort of arrogance that allows a society to dream bleakly of colonizing space, as if colonizing somehow falls into better terms when we project it outside of our, you know, atmosphere. I have a lot of fucking questions.
I'll also say there is something to, you know, we talked a lot about how as artists we can be gentrifiers. Like there's this very complex thing. So what I think that Ted and Saul did so beautifully was go A, very personal, B, ask a lot of big, broad questions, and then C, I think we did have an idea of, at least at the end, like in the, you know, stage version, it ends with Ted conducts the whole thing, and then these placards that we've seen in different ways, he ends up picking one up and just holding it up. And to me, I think within art, there's the ability to clearly, we want to leave space for people to have their own experience, make their own question, you know, answer their own questions. But I think there's also a helpful roadmap that you can kind of drop in and say, here's one option, or here's one thing I can stand behind, that apathy and paralysis is the enemy. And that getting on, I'm not telling you what your front line is going to be. Like we made the placard blank. You know, it was what Saul had such a great, we were rehearsing with these placards and they were blank. And then Saul made a great observation, which is like, blank is kind of brilliant because that is for you. It is for you to say what is on the placard. But I, at least, you know, directorially, and what we wanted to kind of get in the mise en scène was like, but actually taking a step is important. We are saying that. And I do feel like that's what we're getting at a little bit right now, is that there are a lot of people going from back seats to a more embodied experience of resistance. And I think that I don't mind showing this is a roadmap. We're not saying you have to get on this road, but this is a roadmap. If you want progress, here's a way to take at least the first step.
And, you know, one more thing in relation to this, just because I don't know if you guys remember, but I had a question in the beginning when we first, you know, started working on this with the LA Phil and the idea that we were going to be performing in the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And I was thinking a great deal initially about, well, what was that concert hall built over? You know, what was happening there before? There's a poem in the piece called Beneath the Ruins Are Older Ruins. And of course, that brings us back to that first question of the First Nation and the indigenous, but just the idea of, if we dare to raise the question of gentrification, how dare we not first acknowledge, you know, the questions that precede it, you know? But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. And yeah, I loved that moment actually with the signs, Patricia. I remember that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. I mean, I don't know. I don't even think that it's telling you to take a stand. I think it's like it's showing you that you can, and it's like the context of the piece or the context of the theatrical imagination that you showed us. Like that maybe will lead people to that. But like the paralysis, I mean, is it even the enemy, or is it just like? I mean, I think it is for me, but like, if I'm telling you that makes the art boring, right? It's like, but like exploring it and like trying to like show it in a particular light, put it adjacent to certain things. Like that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of like putting them
right.
Yeah.
Right. The juxtaposition of ideas, so that it's not so much as saying, you know, you need to think about this, although it may be, have you considered this? Have you considered this? But that apathy, when it's connected to the fact that you never thought to consider something preceding yourself, that you never considered all, like, for me, what bothers me, and I guess what you'll see like resonating throughout the work, is trying to jar the mind enough to begin the process of thinking and contemplating, of truly just starting to think, as opposed to just, I know that, it's new age, blah, 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 and we want to just be in the moment. But the moment is filled with all of these thoughts and ideas that have preceded us as well, just as the spaces that we fill are. And so, yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a final question. And Ted, as you well know, a performance piece and a recording of a performance piece are not the same thing. They are two different media, and they each have their own strengths, and, they each have their own kind of way of being. What did we just see? It's kind of neither nor. It's is it its own hybrid thing?
Yeah, it is. I wanted to respect the process of how we wrote the piece, which was from the beginning to the end. And as you heard, like Saul received some draft of part one and then responded to it. So we started at the beginning, ended up cutting the very beginning. But the thing evolved as it went. So we're seeing people respond to what has happened already, and what the in the beginning of the piece, that was filmed like right when the LA Phil canceled the show, and then the very end of it was filmed like a month later. And then also, that we just made an album of this work. So Nick Tipp, who's a brilliant producer, really put all that together. And so the instrumental performances, which are just fantastic, and some of my favorite musicians are on there. That's like a proper studio album, right? And then and then of course the singers who had prepped the piece to do it at LA Phil, like 9 days later, they had everything memorized. They knew the whole thing, and then they were able to sing over the backing track. So then we're hearing their live performances from their rooms mixed in with that, which I did. I mixed that, and then I learned video editing software as I was going.
Well, to the three of you, Ted, Patricia, Saul, you've put together a wonderful piece. Like Natalie, I find it really moving, really powerful, and like some of my favorite art, does not take me from A to B to C to D in a really linear way, but allows me as a listener and a viewer to get in there and, as you've all been saying, to kind of make something of it for myself, which, is much better than being talked at, or even sung at, I suppose. It's been a real privilege to be able to premiere this version of Place, and to all of you, thank you for being with us to talk about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thanks to the crew at the Green Space, because while we're doing this virtually, they are actually at the Green Space, so that we could be able to bring this stream to you, and to all of you watching and listening in tonight. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.